Why wasn't she asking a single question? At the briefing table, the others leaned forward, their brows tense as the commander pointed at the red circle on the map. A village, half forgotten by the world, reduced to coordinates on a satellite feed. Routes were debated, contingencies argued over. The lieutenant beside her scribbled notes so furiously his pen squealed. Another soldier tapped his boot against the concrete floor, restless. But she didn't move, didn't write, didn't fidget. Her arms stayed folded across her chest, eyes calm, fixed on the grainy images of rooftops and roads flickering on the projector. To some it looked like indifference, maybe arrogance, but those who had served long enough knew better. There was something in the stillness, a weight, like a coiled spring holding back a storm. The young lieutenant couldn't help it. His question cracked the air like a pebble dropped in still water. "Ma'am, what's your role in this?" Heads turned toward her, curious, almost relieved someone had voiced what they all wanted to ask. She lifted her gaze at last, slowly, as if measuring the silence before she gave it shape. Her eyes locked onto his, not sharp, not harsh, just steady. He blinked, unsettled. For a second it felt as if she saw more than his face, like she had read the nervous beat of his heart. She didn't answer him, didn't need to. After a moment, the commander cleared his throat, muttered something about time, and moved the briefing forward. But her silence lingered longer than the maps, longer than the orders. Later, when they filed out into the burning desert light, she walked apart from the others, boots crunching on gravel, shadow falling behind her like a second presence. Her hand brushed the fabric of her sleeve, where the stitching was frayed, where fingers had once tugged at her arm and begged her not to leave. That hand was smaller, soft, trusting. It belonged to a memory. The convoy stood waiting, engines idling, dust plumes rising. Men strapped rifles to their chests, adjusted helmets, barked half-hearted jokes to keep the nerves from showing. She passed them without slowing, helmet tucked under her arm. Some nodded, some didn't dare. To them she was a question mark wrapped in a uniform. To herself she was something heavier, a woman walking with ghosts. Because she wasn't here for the reasons printed on their briefing packets. The mission had been explained: insurgents, weapons caches, intelligence suggesting a high-value target. That was real enough. But her reason went deeper, buried under the sand of another place, another night. They thought she was detached, maybe even cold, but every breath she took, every step she measured, carried with it the memory of a voice that was no longer alive in this world. "Mama, when you come back, can we go to the river again?" The words haunted her, not because of their sweetness, but because she hadn't kept the promise. The river never came, the house never stood again, and the child never grew old enough to understand why silence swallowed so many mothers, so many fathers, so many voices that should have lived. Now, as she moved, she carried not only her own loss. She carried theirs too, the 1,000 mothers who never saw their sons again, the 1,000 daughters who would never hear their father's footsteps on the porch. Night fell by the time the convoy rolled forward. The desert cooled but did not forgive. She sat in the rear of the armored vehicle, helmet resting on her knees, eyes half closed. Not asleep. Never asleep before an op. The others shifted restlessly, their chatter filling the space with forced bravado. One young soldier beside her, maybe 20 at most, leaned toward her with an awkward grin. "You ever get used to this?" he asked, his voice raised over the hum of the engine. Her eyes opened, slowly. The question wasn't new, but the face asking it was always different. She studied him for a beat. He wanted reassurance, maybe wisdom. She gave him only the truth. "You don't," she said. He blinked, waited as if hoping she'd soften it with a smile or tack on some veteran's trick to calm his fear. But she didn't. Her answer hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The boy nodded, though he didn't understand. He pulled at his chin strap, adjusting it nervously. His hands trembled despite his effort to still them. She almost reached out, almost, but she didn't. Touch was dangerous. Connection was dangerous. It made ghosts harder to carry when they inevitably joined the silence. The engine roared louder as the convoy sped across the flats. The desert smelled of oil and dust, metallic and sharp, seeping through every seam of the vehicle. Somewhere ahead, lights flickered on the horizon, the village. But before they reached it, before the commander gave the hand signal, the night broke apart. The first shot cracked like a whip. The windshield starred with impact spraying glass. Dust exploded as rounds tore into the ground beside them. Someone screamed. The driver cursed, jerking the wheel, brakes screeching. The vehicle jolted, men slammed against the walls, helmets clanging. Panic is loud, orders are louder, but her voice when it came cut through all of it. Stay low. Calm, even, not raised, yet somehow it anchored them. Another crack, another burst of dust. Men ducked, cursed, scrambled for their weapons. The convoy ground to a halt, headlights throwing long beams into the chaos. Eyes left, someone shouted. Return fire. Her pulse stayed steady. She pressed her helmet onto her head, the strap snug under her chin, her rifle already in her hands. But she didn't fire. Not yet. Her eyes scanned the dark. Shadows, muzzle flashes, movement. She listened more than she looked, the rhythm of the gunfire telling her more than the lights. Then she saw it, not the shooters, but the pattern. They weren't aiming to kill, not yet. They were aiming to stop, to scatter, to bait. Her jaw tightened. She spoke again, low, so only those closest to her caught the words. Don't chase, that's what they want. The young soldier beside her flinched, his hands trembling on his rifle. She glanced at him, her voice steady enough for him to borrow its strength. Breathe. He obeyed, in, out slowly, his shoulders eased. And in that brief lull, as the firefight stretched and strained, she felt the weight of her silence press harder against her chest. Because this wasn't the real trap. The ambush wasn't about them. Not really. It was about what lay hidden in that village. Something the maps didn't show. Something she hadn't told them. Not yet. The commander barked into the radio, calling for air support. Static answered. The horizon glowed faintly as another vehicle went up in flames, fire painting the sand orange. Screams carried on the wind. Still she didn't fire, didn't speak again, just watched, calculating, listening. Because she knew this wasn't the battle she had come for. This was only the doorway. And behind that doorway was the face she carried, the voice she couldn't let go, the silence she couldn't let stay unanswered. What was waiting inside that village? The firefight outside the convoy was fierce, but it wasn't chaos. Not to her. It had a rhythm, an intention. She could hear it in the way the rounds came in waves, not continuous. Whoever was shooting wasn't trying to overwhelm. They were drawing attention, forcing her unit to stay pinned. The lieutenant cursed, pressing his shoulder against the armored plating. They're everywhere. No, they were. She knew better. She could feel it in her bones. The enemy wasn't spread wide. They were narrow, focused. And the real trap wasn't here, it was deeper. A scream tore through the night. One of the drivers outside hit before he could duck. She flinched, but only inside. Her hand stayed steady on the rifle. The young soldier beside her looked at her, waiting, like she might have the answer to something no one else knew. She didn't give him one, not yet. Return fire, the commander barked again. Suppress the ridge. Bullets rained upward, hammering against the dunes where muzzle flashes sparked. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The angles didn't match. The ridge wasn't their nest. It was their decoy. The real shooters were closer, hiding in the village's edge, hurting them. The commander's voice boomed in the dark, sharp with panic. We push left, flank them. No. The word was soft, but it cut clean through the noise. Heads turned toward her. The commander froze mid-step, as if he just heard a note that didn't belong to the song. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. That's what they want. The commander bristled. He was older, gray creeping through his stubble, his pride sharper than his instinct. He didn't like being challenged, least of all by her, but something in her tone made him hesitate. For a moment only the desert spoke, the crack of rifles, the hum of engines, the whistle of wind. Then another burst of fire struck close, chewing dirt at their feet. "Then what do you suggest?" The commander spat, louder than the bullets. She didn't answer right away. She listened again, counted the spaces between shots, listened for the silence under the noise. Finally she spoke. "We hold, we wait them out. This isn't the kill zone." The commander scoffed. "And how do you know that?" Her eyes flicked toward the village, toward the shadows that swallowed the buildings. She thought of the photograph folded inside her vest. She thought of the face, of the promise she hadn't kept. "Because I've been here before," she whispered. It wasn't the whole truth, not even close, but it was enough to still the air. The firefight dragged. Minutes felt like hours, but she was right. The enemy fire slowed, then stopped, like water pulling back from shore, waiting for them to step forward. The commander clenched his jaw, frustrated. He hated her silence, but he hated the idea of walking into a trap more. Finally, he motioned to hold position. The men exhaled in relief. Some muttered thanks under their breath. Others simply stared at her, as if she had read the desert like scripture. But inside, her chest ached, because every second they delayed brought her closer to the truth she dreaded, the face in the village, the silence she had carried too long. When the order finally came to move, the vehicles rolled forward slowly, headlights cutting beams into the night. The village loomed ahead, mud walls, broken windows, alleys narrow enough to swallow entire squads. She dismounted first. Boots hit the sand with a dull thud. Her rifle hugged her shoulder, eyes sharp. The air smelled of ash and old smoke, like the ghosts of fires long dead. The young soldier followed her, steps clumsy, breathing too loud. She didn't look back at him, but she slowed just enough so he could match her pace. "Why wait?" he whispered, voice cracking. She didn't answer. Not yet, because the truth wasn't his burden to carry. The streets were empty, too empty. Dogs should have barked. Children should have whispered behind cracked doors, but silence ruled, silence heavier than the one she carried. Her boots crunched on scattered glass. She paused, listening. The others spread, rifles raised, eyes darting. Somewhere a shutter banged against a wall, echoing like a gunshot. "Clear left," one of them called. "Clear right," another echoed. But she knew it wasn't clear. Villages like this were never clear. They were layers, walls behind walls, voices behind silence. Her hand brushed her vest again. The photograph inside pressed against her ribs like a thorn. She hadn't shown it to anyone. She wouldn't. Not until she found the truth it demanded. The commander came up behind her, voice low but sharp. "You lead, then, since you seem to know." He meant it as an insult, but she nodded and stepped forward. The alleys tightened. Buildings leaned over them, shadows swallowing their shapes. The men followed, tense, rifles twitching with every sound. And then a cry, faint, childlike. Every soldier froze. Rifles jerked toward the sound. Her breath caught. The cry came again, from deeper inside. The young soldier's eyes widened. "Is that?" She didn't let him finish. "Stay sharp, don't move." The commander frowned. "It's bait." She nodded, yes. But still her legs moved. Because she had heard that sound before. Not the same voice, not the same child, but close enough that the river rose in her mind again and the promise echoed, cruel and relentless. She moved through the silence, each step heavier than the last. The cry came again, weak, desperate. Behind her the squad shifted nervously, caught between duty and doubt. The commander hissed, "Fall back, now." She didn't listen. Because this was why she was here. Not for maps, not for orders, not even for the men beside her. She was here for the silence that haunted her, the silence she had sworn she would break. And inside that village, behind the walls and shadows, was the answer she had buried with her own hands. The cry came once more, then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than gunfire. And she walked straight into it. Why did she hesitate before pulling the trigger? The rooftop was quiet, too quiet. Only the faint hum of a generator in the distance, the shuffle of boots far below. She was in position, scope steady, the target framed perfectly. Training told her it was simple: breathe out, squeeze, end it. Yet her finger stalled on the trigger. A second stretched. Then two. Through the glass she saw him move, not with the swagger of a commander, not the mechanical pace of a guard, but with the uneven shuffle of someone tired. His jacket slipped from one shoulder, exposing an old scar, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. That tremor did something to her. It reminded her of a man sitting on the edge of a bed years ago, knuckles raw, smoke curling in silence. Her father. Her breath caught. The desert heat pressed heavy against her skin, but her blood went cold. She blinked, pulled herself back. This wasn't her father. This wasn't anyone she loved. But the memory of that night, the smell of smoke, the sound of his sigh blurred the line between target and memory. She exhaled, focus, reset. She couldn't afford hesitation. A voice crackled faintly in her earpiece. Raven, status. Her jaw clenched. She hated the call sign. Raven, a bird scavenging on battlefields. She wanted to answer with her name, to remind herself she was more than this mask, more than a tool. But she clicked her mic twice instead. Silent confirmation. The man below leaned against the table, unaware of the eyes on him. She had studied his file: logistics officer, known for funneling weapons through back channels. Neutralizing him meant cutting off supply lines, sparing villages from being raided. That was the mission. That was the justification. So why did she see her father's hands? A shift in movement pulled her back. Another figure entered the room, a young boy, no older than 10. He handed the officer a glass of water and sat quietly in the corner. She felt her stomach drop. They hadn't briefed her about a child. The crosshairs wavered. Her mind spiraled. If she fired now, the boy would remember this moment forever. The echo of a rifle, the shattering of glass, the sudden collapse of someone he trusted. Would he grow into another enemy, another boy raised on revenge? Her finger froze. She pulled back from the scope, closed her eyes. For a second, she hated herself, for even questioning, for letting ghosts get in the way of duty, for carrying too much humanity in a profession that demanded its absence. The radio buzzed again. Raven, we don't have time, take the shot. Her pulse quickened. A bead of sweat traced her temple. She wiped it with the back of her hand, eyes darting back to the scope. The boy had left the room. Only the officer remained. The silence inside her cracked. The trigger broke. Glass shattered, body dropped, and the hum of the generator seemed louder now. She pulled away, heart thundering, breath uneven. Not because of the kill, but because of what it cost her inside. She packed quickly, sliding the rifle into its case, every movement precise. The extraction point was 2 streets over. The sun was sinking, casting long shadows through the alleyways as she descended. Each footstep echoed louder than it should have. A stray dog barked at her as she passed. Its ribs showed, eyes sharp, but it didn't chase. Just watched. She wondered if it knew, if animals could sense guilt. When she reached the rendezvous, 2 men were waiting in the vehicle. One smiled faintly, offering her a canteen. She shook her head. Water would taste like ash right now. They drove in silence. Dust curled around the wheels, sun bleeding into the horizon. She kept her eyes on the window, her reflection staring back. Cold, distant, yet fragile beneath the mask. Her thoughts drifted again to the boy. Did he hear the shot? Did he rush into that room? Did he see the lifeless body, smell the smoke, feel the silence afterward? She told herself not to wonder. Curiosity was weakness, but she couldn't stop. That night in the safe house, she lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories did. Her mother's voice, soft lullabies drowned by arguments. Her father's hands trembling as he reached for another cigarette. The sound of a door slamming, footsteps fading. She had buried these memories under layers of training, mission after mission. But tonight, they clawed their way out. She pressed her palms to her face, whispered into the dark, "Why do I still hear them?" No answer came. Just the hum of the old refrigerator, the flicker of a bulb fighting to stay alive. The world outside carried on, trucks passing, voices shouting, life unfolding. But inside that room she carried silence, heavy, suffocating. Morning came too soon. She dressed mechanically, every movement stripped of emotion. But when she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror, she froze. For a moment she saw not a soldier but a daughter. A child who once wanted to be a teacher, not a sniper. A girl who once believed silence was peace, not punishment. The knock on her door pulled her back. Orders had arrived. Another mission, another ghost waiting to be made. She didn't answer right away. Her hand lingered on the doorknob, heart unsteady, because she knew with each mission a piece of her would stay behind, buried, unspoken. Another silence added to the thousands she already carried. And she wondered, how many silences can one soul hold before it breaks? What happens when silence follows you like a shadow you can't shake? She learned that answer 3 nights later. The desert air was colder than it should have been. Even beneath her jacket, the chill pressed into her bones. She sat on the edge of the armored truck, boots planted in sand, rifle resting across her knees. Around her, the team laughed at something one of the younger guys said, something about how he'd marry a girl back home if he made it out alive. The laughter was short, but it was there. Warm, fleeting. She didn't join. She stared at the horizon instead, where the moon cut through layers of thin clouds. She didn't laugh because she knew something they didn't. That silence doesn't leave you when the shot is fired. It stays. It clings. It grows heavier with every trigger pull, every mission, every body that drops. The radio buzzed low inside the truck. The captain's voice, target movement confirmed, 30 minutes to intercept, lock and load. She lifted the rifle slowly, hands steady, though inside her chest was restless. The last mission still lived in her. The boy's face in the corner of the room, the cigarette smoke curling like her father's. The way the silence afterward seemed louder than the shot itself. She told herself not to dwell, but she carried it anyway because there was nowhere else for it to go. The convoy started moving, headlights dimmed, engines rumbling like a heartbeat beneath the sand. She sat in the back pressed to the steel wall, eyes closed briefly. She counted each bump, each sway of the truck, a rhythm, a meditation, but it wasn't enough to drown the memory. When they stopped, it was sudden. Dust swirled as boots hit the ground. Orders came sharp, clipped, sweep the compound, secure the objective, clear the way for extraction. She checked her rifle again, scope adjusted, magazine clipped in. The familiar weight should have felt like comfort. Instead, it felt like confession. They moved through shadows, the night alive with whispers and the soft crunch of gravel under boots. She positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the compound, scope scanning windows, doors, rooftops. Every shadow was a question, every flicker of movement a possible answer. Inside the compound, shapes shifted. Voices rose, muffled but tense. She relayed positions calmly, her voice steady over comms, though her heart was. She wanted to believe this mattered, that each mission drew a line between chaos and order, between destruction and survival. But some part of her wondered if they were just adding more silence to the world. Then it happened. A door burst open, figures scrambled, muzzle flashes lit the dark. The firefight was sudden, sharp, unforgiving. She found her target through the scope, a man sprinting toward a vehicle, weapons slung across his chest. Orders came fast. Take him out. She breathed, exhaled, fired. The man dropped, dust rose, shouts echoed. Another silence added to her collection. But then she saw her team pinned near the gate, pressed against a crumbling wall. Bullets cracked inches above their heads. Her role was overwatch, distance, precision. But watching them struggle lit something in her chest she couldn't ignore. She repositioned, crawling along the ridge until she found the angle. One by one she picked off threats. Each shot echoed against stone, followed by silence, the wall of fire thinning, her team pushing forward. Her breath steadied, her focus sharpened, and for a fleeting moment it felt like control, not redemption, not peace, just control. When it was over, the compound stood silent. Smoke drifted. The team regrouped, breathless but alive. Someone clapped her shoulder when she descended from the ridge. "Hell of a shot, Raven," he said, his grin wide despite the dirt and sweat. She gave a tight nod, but inside she felt nothing. No pride, no victory, just silence. Later, when they searched the compound, she stepped into a dimly lit room. Maps on the table, radios still buzzing faintly, and in the corner a cot, a child's shoes under it. Her chest tightened. She turned away before anyone else noticed. She didn't want them to see her falter. She didn't want them to know the silence inside her wasn't clean, wasn't noble. It was messy, human. That night back at the outpost, she sat alone outside the barracks. The stars stretched endless above, cold and unreachable. One of the younger soldiers joined her, sitting a few feet away. He didn't speak at first, just smoked quietly, the ember glowing between his fingers. Finally he asked, "Do you ever feel like we're just ghosts waiting to happen?" She turned to him. The question cut deeper than he knew. She saw the fear behind his casual tone, the way his eyes avoided hers. She could have lied, could have told him what soldiers are supposed to say, that they fight for freedom, that their sacrifices are worth it. Instead, she whispered, "Every night." He didn't respond, just nodded, flicked the cigarette into the dirt and left. She stayed, staring at the smoke curling upward until it faded into the dark. It looked like her father's again. It always did. When she finally stood, her legs felt heavy. Her boots pressed deep prints into the sand, as if the earth wanted to remember her steps, but she wondered if it would remember her silence too. The next morning, orders came again. Another mission, another silence waiting to be carried. She accepted without a word because words had long since lost their weight. Yet inside, she asked herself the question she couldn't voice out loud. How many silences before a soul becomes nothing but echoes? Why did she wake up gasping, as if drowning in air? The safe house was dark, the thin curtain fluttering against a cracked window, but her chest heaved as though someone had stolen the oxygen. Her hand gripped her shirt, sweat soaking through fabric. She sat up slowly, eyes scanning corners, rifle within reach out of instinct. No threat, just shadows, just silence. But in her dream, it hadn't been shadows. It had been faces. The boy in the compound, the man with trembling hands, and behind them a crowd she couldn't count, 1,000 pairs of eyes staring, waiting, demanding an answer she couldn't give. Her breathing steadied, but the weight didn't leave. She pressed her palms to her temples, whispering to herself, "Just a dream, just a dream." But she knew better. Dreams were memory's way of bleeding out. A knock broke the stillness. Low, hesitant, she froze. Another knock followed, softer this time. She rose, every movement controlled, careful. Rifle in one hand, she edged toward the door, muscles tense. "It's me," a voice, quiet, familiar. She lowered the weapon slightly and opened the door. The young soldier from the night before stood there, eyes restless. He didn't wait for her to ask. He slipped inside, shut the door, and leaned against it. His hands shook as he ran them through his hair. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice cracked. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear it, the gunfire, the screaming. He broke off, biting the inside of his cheek until it bled. She said nothing, just watched. His silence mirrored hers. Finally, he whispered, "How do you live with it?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, that she didn't live with it, she carried it. Like sand in her boots, like smoke in her lungs. That each day wasn't living, just walking. But the words stuck. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, motioning for him to sit too. He hesitated, then sank down beside her, head in his hands. "People think the noise is the worst part," she said quietly, surprising herself. "But it is. It's the silence after, that's what stays." He looked at her, eyes wet but sharp. Does it ever stop? She held his gaze, and for once she didn't hide. No. The word hung heavy between them. He nodded, jaw trembling, as though the honesty hurt but also gave him something to hold on to. When he left, dawn was already breaking. She stood at the window, watching lights stretch across rooftops. A new day, a new mission, but she felt the crack widening inside her. The briefing that morning was brisk, voices clipped. A convoy had gone missing near the border, civilians, possibly taken hostage. Their job was to find them, secure them, bring them back alive. She felt the room tighten with unspoken tension. Hostage rescues were chaos. No clean shots, no distance, face to face with fear. On the ride out, she sat across from the captain, his jaw set, his eyes shadowed by years of command. He caught her staring and asked, almost casually, "You ever wonder why it's always us?" She tilted her head, "Because we don't say no." A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Or maybe because we already lost the things they could take from us. The words lingered long after the engine roared back to life. She thought of her family, her mother's soft voice, her father's trembling hands. She wondered if the captain was right, if she had been chosen not for her skill but for her emptiness. The compound was quiet when they arrived, too quiet. She swept her rifle across doorways, windows, the ridgeline above. Shadows shifted, but nothing clear. Her breath slowed, each inhale sharp in her chest. Then a sound cut through, a muffled cry, small, fragile. Her blood froze. The team breached, doors splintered, shouts echoed. She moved fast, clearing corners, rifle leading. In a back room she found them. 3 civilians huddled together, wrists bound, faces pale. A woman clutched a child so tightly it seemed her arms might break. Their eyes widened when they saw her, terror and hope tangled together. "Safe," she whispered, lowering her weapon. "You're safe now." But the word tasted bitter, because even as she said it, gunfire erupted in the next room. Screams followed. She pushed them behind her, rifle snapping to her shoulder. 2 men burst through the doorway, weapons raised. She fired before they could. Bodies dropped. Silence followed. Her ears rang. The woman sobbed. The child clung tighter. And in that moment, she felt it again, the fracture inside her soul, because she wasn't just carrying her silence anymore. She was carrying theirs. The extraction was brutal. Smoke, fire, the roar of engines, but they made it out. The civilians were alive. On paper, the mission was a success. Yet back at the base, when the others celebrated, she sat alone in the corner. The sound of the child's cry replayed in her head, not because it was loud, but because of how quiet it became afterward. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against her hands. For a long time she didn't move, didn't speak. And she thought if silence had weight, hers could crush the world. Why did the child's cry linger longer than the gunfire? Days passed, but it didn't fade. She heard it in the hum of the mess hall fridge, in the squeak of boots across the barracks floor, in the way silence stretched too long between words. A child's voice breaking, then cut short. The memory clung, sharper than any bullet. She told herself to bury it, to keep moving. That's what soldiers do, but burial isn't the same as disappearance. Buried things push back, clawing at the surface until you feel them under every step. The orders came again. New mission, remote village. Intelligence pointed to a weapons cache hidden beneath homes, shielded by civilians. It wasn't her decision, but it would be her silence. On the helicopter, the blades thundered above, hot wind rushing against her face. She sat strapped in, rifle across her chest, eyes fixed on nothing. Around her, the others joked, masking nerves with bravado. One soldier spoke of his daughter back home, how she'd just started school. His voice cracked when he mentioned her, drawing pictures of him as a hero. The words twisted inside her. Hero. She wanted to laugh, to scream. Heroes don't collect silences like medals. Heroes don't see children hiding in corners and think about how their eyes looked the same as her own when she was small. The captain caught her glance. "You good?" She nodded once, a lie. They landed just outside the village. Dust rose, settling into their skin. The air was heavy with smoke from cooking fires, the faint scent of bread. It could have been any other place, any other life. The villagers stared as soldiers fanned out, faces lined with worry, suspicion, resignation. Children clung to mothers wide-eyed. She scanned rooftops, alleys, doorways, looking for threats, seeing ghosts. Inside one house they found crates beneath floorboards, ammunition, weapons proof enough. The captain barked orders, secure the site, detain the men. She held her rifle steady, but her heart was. She caught sight of a girl, maybe 9 years old, peeking from behind a doorway, thin arms, eyes sharp. The girl didn't flinch when soldiers stormed past. She just stared at her, unblinking. For a moment time stilled. She saw herself in that gaze, the same suspicion, the same silent accusation. She turned away, but the weight followed. The mission escalated fast. One of the detained men lunged, grabbing for a rifle. Shots rang out. Chaos erupted. Smoke filled the air, shouts colliding with screams. Through it all, she moved like she was trained to, precise, cold, efficient. But inside, the fracture widened. Every pull of the trigger felt less like duty, more like theft, taking silence from those who'd never asked for war. When it was over, the air hung thick with dust and grief. The villagers wept quietly. Soldiers checked their gear, counted heads, tallied ammunition. Another mission, another silence. That night back at base, she couldn't sit with the others. Their laughter felt hollow, their voices too loud. She walked outside instead, into the cool desert air. Stars stretched above, endless, indifferent. The young soldier found her again, the one who asked if they were ghosts. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, sat without asking. "They'll call this a win," he said after a long silence, "but it doesn't feel like one." She nodded, fingers tightening around the cup. "I keep thinking about that little girl," he continued. "The way she looked at me, like I was," he trailed off, searching for the word. She finished it for him, "a stranger in her home." He stared at her, surprised, but he didn't argue. They sat there side by side, saying nothing more, just sharing silence. But it wasn't empty, it was heavy, shared. When he left, she stayed. The wind carried the faintest sound of laughter from inside the barracks, muffled and far. She stared at the horizon, where the desert swallowed the moon. She thought about the girl, about the civilians they'd rescued, about the boy who had handed water to the man she killed, and about her father, always her father, trembling hands, smoke curling in silence. And she wondered, maybe silence wasn't something she carried alone. Maybe it was something inherited, passed down, a legacy not of words but of what words failed to hold. Her chest tightened, her throat burned. She didn't cry, she never did, but her silence tonight was louder than any scream. The next morning, when the orders came again, she didn't hesitate. She strapped her rifle across her chest, boots hitting the ground hard. Because this was what she knew. The missions would never stop. The silence would never ease. And she would keep walking, one step at a time, until the weight either broke her or became the only thing keeping her upright. And still she asked herself, when the war ends, if it ever does, who will she be when the silence is all that's left? What happens when the silence inside you becomes louder than the battlefield? She didn't notice it at first. Not in the middle of missions, not when the dust stormed around her boots, not even when bullets cracked close enough to taste the heat. Out there, her focus drowned everything. But afterward, when the radio went quiet, when the team laughed too easily, when the night stretched long, she felt it. The silence, thick, pressing, not around her, inside her. The captain noticed too. He didn't say it outright, but his eyes lingered on her longer now. During the briefing, his gaze swept past the others quickly, but when it landed on her, it held. As if he was looking for fractures, for proof of what she already knew, that something inside her had started to split. The mission was simple on paper. A reconnaissance sweep through abandoned ruins where enemy signals had been traced. Low risk, the captain called it. She hated that phrase. Low risk was just another way of saying unexpected loss. They set out at dawn. The light was pale, sharp across the ridges. The ruins loomed like broken teeth rising from the sand. She walked point, rifle raised, steps steady, ears tuned to every shift of wind. But her mind kept drifting. Each empty doorway seemed to hold shadows of people who weren't there. Each rusted door creak sounded like the echo of children crying. She blinked, forced herself to stay in the moment. But the silence followed, step for step. "Clear here," one of the soldiers called out. "Copy," she replied, her voice flat. They moved deeper, the air staler, the walls scarred with bullet holes from battles long past. She ran her fingers along the stone once, tracing grooves left by violence. The wall was cold, unyielding. Then movement. Her scope caught a flash in a window 2 levels up. A glint like glass catching sun. She froze, lifted her rifle, adjusted. The shape resolved, a figure crouched low, weapon aimed. She exhaled, fired. The body dropped, limp against the sill before sliding out of view. Silence followed, sharp as a blade. But it didn't last. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Ambush. The team scattered, shouts mixing with shots. She dropped behind a crumbled wall, pulse racing. Her hands moved on instinct, chambering rounds, scanning for threats. Figures darted across rooftops. She fired precise. One fell, another ducked. The air filled with dust, smoke, screams. Then a cry, close, human. She turned. Behind a half-collapsed door, a boy crouched, hands over his ears. Not a fighter, just caught in the crossfire, her chest seized. The silence cracked. She dropped her rifle, crawled to him, shielding his small frame with her body as debris rained down. "Stay down," she whispered, her voice low, urgent. "Don't move." His eyes widened, terrified. She recognized that look. She had worn it once. Her earpiece buzzed. "Raven status, report." She didn't answer, couldn't. The boy's breathing was ragged, his small body trembling against her. The firefight roared on. She wanted to lift her rifle, to return to her post, to be the sniper they needed. But she couldn't let go, not this time. Minutes stretched. The battle eased, then ended, leaving dust and silence in its wake. Her team regrouped, calling out, checking for wounds. When the captain found her, she was still kneeling beside the boy. His face darkened, but he didn't scold. He simply said, "We can't take him with us." Her jaw clenched. "Then I'm not leaving him." The words hung heavy. A challenge, a confession, a fracture breaking open. The captain studied her for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. "One evac, that's it. After that, we walk." Relief and dread tangled in her chest. She pulled the boy close, guiding him as they moved toward the extraction point. His small hand clutched her sleeve, desperate, silent. On the helicopter out, the wind roared, whipping her hair loose. She held the boy steady, staring at the horizon. For the first time, she wasn't thinking of the next mission, or the orders, or the silence waiting. She was thinking of this child, alive, breathing. And she wondered, had she broken the chain, even for just one life? But when she glanced at the boy again, she saw his wide eyes, the trembling of his hands, the way he couldn't stop staring at the ground below as it disappeared. And she realized something bitter. Silence wasn't broken, it was passed on. And she asked herself, was saving one enough? Or was she just giving him another silence to carry, like hers, like her father's, like the 1,000 buried in her already? The question clung as the helicopter cut across the sky, a question with no answer, only silence. The desert was quiet now. Not silent, but quieter than it had any right to be. The fires had burned low, leaving only skeletal remains of buildings that once held families. The air carried the bitter tang of smoke mixed with something metallic, something that clung to her throat every time she breathed. She walked through the ruins, her boots sinking into ash and dust, her rifle slung across her chest, but her hands resting light, almost absent. It was over. At least, that's what they told her. But in her chest, something said it was. She paused near what used to be a doorway. The frame was gone, but the stones still held their shape, blackened at the edges. In the corner she saw it, a child's shoe. Charred but intact. She crouched, picked it up carefully as if the leather might still burn her fingers. It weighed almost nothing. Still, it dragged her down like an anchor. Her breath hitched, a single tremor breaking through the armor she'd worn for months. She put the shoe back where it was. She didn't need souvenirs. The weight inside her chest was enough. When she returned to the base, the men watched her the way they always did, half respect, half unease. Nobody ever really spoke about her silence, but they all felt it. She never bragged, never cursed, never complained, just moved, precise, efficient. She carried herself like someone who had already paid a debt that no one else could understand. One of the younger soldiers stopped her. His helmet hung loose in his hand, and his voice cracked when he asked, "Do you ever get used to it? The smell, the faces?" He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. She studied him, his trembling jaw, the sweat that beaded though the night air was cool. And she said nothing for a long time, just let the silence stretch, let him hear his own heartbeat. Then softly she whispered, "You don't get used to it. You just learn not to look away." He nodded, almost ashamed, as if her answer demanded something of him he wasn't sure he had. But she wasn't trying to be wise. She wasn't trying to teach. She was only speaking to herself, reminding herself why she kept walking forward even when her knees wanted to buckle. Later, she sat alone by the airstrip, watching planes take off into the endless dark. Each roar of engines shook the ground beneath her boots. She wondered if the mothers who once held the sons now flying those planes felt the tremors too, halfway across the world, in kitchens or living rooms where the news was always on low volume but always on. She thought of her own mother, the way her voice had cracked the last time they spoke, before the call ended with a silence that wasn't silence at all, but distance. The mission had ended. That was the official line, but she knew missions never ended. They left traces, in the ground, in the walls, in the people, in the way you woke up gasping at night, unable to explain the sound in your ears that wasn't really there anymore. They lived on in every pair of eyes that had seen what should not be seen. She packed her gear slowly, methodically, each item placed exactly where it belonged, as if order could somehow tame the chaos she carried inside. As if by lining up her rifle, her boots, her folded uniform, she could line up the broken pieces of herself too. She zipped the bag shut, but the silence inside her stayed. The commander found her near dawn. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, watching the horizon bleed from black to gray to pale orange. Finally, he said, "You did good work." She turned her head slightly, met his eyes, and saw that even he didn't believe the words. He cleared his throat. "They'll remember this one." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to say, "Who will remember?" The civilians whose homes had burned, the children whose names no one wrote down, or the soldiers, half drunk, half broken, who would forget in order to keep breathing. But she stayed silent, because some questions didn't need answers. They only needed to linger. On the flight home, she kept her hands clasped in her lap. Outside the window, the clouds drifted, endless, fragile. She tried to close her eyes, but each time she did, the shoe returned. That little shoe, blackened and empty. When the wheels touched down and the hatch opened, she was the last to step off. Reporters waited. Families cheered. The men around her embraced wives, children, friends. She stood a little apart, her eyes on the ground, until she felt a hand squeeze her shoulder. One of her teammates, his face lined, his eyes softer now than they'd been in the field. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They had both carried the same silence, and for that moment it was enough. She walked forward past the cameras, past the flags. No medals pinned yet. No speeches, just the weight of the mission still heavy inside her. People saw her in uniform and saw a soldier, but they didn't see the soul she carried. The mothers buried in silence. The children lost in smoke. The voices that never got to rise again. She carried them all, not as ghosts, but as quiet witnesses. That night, alone in her small apartment, she sat by the window and let the city lights blur. She didn't pour a drink, didn't turn on the TV. She just sat, listening to nothing and to everything. And maybe that was the point. Maybe her story was never about the missions or the medals or the ranks. Maybe it was about what survived in silence, the dignity of carrying pain without letting it harden into cruelty, the quiet act of remembering when forgetting would be easier, the strength of a soldier whose weapon was not only her rifle, but her refusal to let the world erase what mattered. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And she would keep carrying it, in every step, in every silence, until the world itself finally listened.